Hello everybody and welcome to the show. I am back with Patrick Dixon and we're going to discuss some more spiritual science. We actually had a request from someone if we could talk about the representative of humanity, which is one of the statues, it's wooden, that Rudolf Steiner and Edith Marion created for the Goetheanum. It's one of the few things, luckily it wasn't in the first Goetheanum when it burnt down, it was still in the sculpture room. So that's why we still have this enormous piece of wooden sculpture, which you see that we'll have pictures of it with this audio. So Patrick, welcome to the show, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about this representative of humanity.
Yeah, I used to, paradoxically, I was a guardian of this statue for a while. I worked in Dorna, in the Goetheanum, where this was. So it's 30 feet high. It's a large wooden sculpture. And it depicts three beings, actually 4 beings, and 2 of them are depicted twice. It has within it the central figure, which is the representative of humanity, this sort of divine human, the archetype, the product of the project of the gods to create this archetypal humanity. And then around it, on either side, it's got figures that, in a way, are the opposition. What it also symbolizes is the uprightness of the ego, not unrelated to the Odysseus when he says, "Tie me to the mast, so that I do not listen to the voice I do not heed the voice of the sirens." He says to his men, "Keep rowing, block your ears, tie me to the mast. I want to hear it, but I must not respond in the way they want." And this is really partly what this statue represents as well. It's the higher ego who's looking forward to the purpose of humanity, the purpose of the great universal project in which we're all involved. On either side are these massive forces of distraction, which could become forces of destruction. And what they are is, on the right-hand side, when you look at the thing, the right-hand side of the figure is the being of Ahriman, who's also underneath. So what this thing is depicting is really a bilateral symmetry of the central figure, which is also the human being, within a rotary motion. This is the world, you could say, the WHIRLED, the world, that is whirling astral world, for which the central figure says, "I have overcome the world. I can whirl it myself, but it cannot whirl me." And that's, so we have this, underneath we have the figure of Ahriman, who's in the interior of the earth, in a sense, bound by his own materialism, bound by his own attachment to materiality. And also rising up on the right side of the figure he's coming up. And then you have on the other side, on the left side of the figure, you have the being of Lucifer, who's falling down. You've also got Lucifer on the right, arising above Ahriman, and this is Lucifer going into his cosmic dream, you could say, and being drawn down on the left side into his earth awakening. I mean, there's so many levels in this statue, and we're also going to talk a bit about the Last Judgement, Michelangelo's great painting on the back wall of the Sistine Chapel, because it has a very interesting relationship to this form. So Lucifer, when Lucifer's wings, as he's falling, you can see they're changing. And what that really means is that, to a certain extent, the wings are forming the vessels and ducts and organs of the human being, which is the great humiliation and humbling of the Lucifer. His wings are serving those forms, and that's both his salvation. It seems he feels it as a tragedy, but actually it's his salvation. On the other side, Ahriman is coming up. Ahriman is to be raised up out of that subnatural realms, which is what we're experiencing now. The world encompassing and world encircling forces of the divine human ego that lives in all of us, is in a way drawing Ahriman out of his hiding place in the interior of the earth. Now he thinks that he's coming up of his own volition to dominate the earth, and if we fall asleep then he will, but if we are awake then we will transform Ahriman through, that's the Christ consciousness, through the central figure will transform and redeem Ahriman. It's all about transformation, and this whole circular motion, Ahriman coming up on the right, Lucifer falling down on the left. Of course we see this in the whole idea of clockwise motion. This is the motion of time, exactly what happens in a clock. You have the rising up on the right, down on the left, coming up again. And of course, and in the Last Judgment it's also the same thing. You have the figures on the left are falling down into the underworld, and it's the sort of damned in a sense. And then on the right you have the figures rising up in resurrection. In the central base you have literally have the realm of death, and then you have the realm of hell, an expulsion out on the left. And this is like and then of course these are great archetypes, and you can see this motion in both the representative humanity and in the Last Judgment. The slight difference is, well, I mean artistically they're quite differently expressed, but the Christ figure is more like a Jupiterian figure above the world and is judging, whereas in the representative of humanity this figure is completely immersed in the experience of the adversary forces. So it's a kind of image of the divine sacrifice of being involved in the earth evolution, whereas in the Last Judgment it's still like a mosaic experience. It's like coming from Sinai, looking down, judging, which has its place. But I mean, what the representative of humanity symbolizes is really the time when the Lord of Karma role or position, you could say, was handed from Moses to Christ, which is a very important thing. Moses has other tasks now, but that's a very important element of it. But to go into also deeper, the mystery, the archetype of these two forms goes right down into the depths of the physical body, even though Steiner's representative is not really, it's really more in the astral and etheric. But if you look at the human body, if you go inside, you have on the outside, you have bilateral symmetry, more or less, with minor distortions, but the attempt at that, the twofoldness in all the way through the body. And then there's a central part, like the spinal column, and in the chakras there's the central realm. But if you go into the left side of the body, you've got the inside, you've got what I call a polarity of function. So on the left side, there's a real tendency towards what I call descent. The left side of the heart is stronger and slightly more descended. It's heavier. And out of that comes the arterial blood, and the main arterial blood goes to the lower part of the body. And that is really what I call the Mars departure. That blood is filled with the forces of the Father, oxygenated blood. It's red. It carries the life force down into all the realms beneath. Then on the right side comes up the inferior vena cava, which is the main vein which comes up on the right and enters the right side of the heart, which is not as massive in a sense as the left. And this is a symbolic of all that's in the human world is carried back from all that we've gained from the cosmos, back to the heart, to the Christ representing the heart, the link between the Father forces bringing in the arterial blood and the human world bringing the venous blood. And in a way there's a kind of wordplay here, but it has a meaning. Talk about the venous return, that it's eventually that blood will be filled with a love force. It will be itself a source of life, not just something that has to be expelled in carbon dioxide. It will be a life force, and that will depend upon what transformations the human body has gone through. But it's very important to see that these archetypes of this circulation, because in a way we breathe down in and we send the main portion of the blood downwards through the arteries. A small portion goes up into the upper pole, and then we bring back the main portion of the blood up on the right side into the heart again. But also in the digestive system, you've got the descending colon on the left side. So and you've got the ascending colon on the right. And also you've got the polarity of function is in the stomach and the liver. The stomach is really the decomposer. You've got the great decomposition processes that go on the left, and then you've got the liver, which is the composer. The liver synthesizes, the stomach analyzes, and this is really seen in this process of the resurrection from the dead. You know, the macrobiome and the microbiome, where everything dies, everything is dying, and then it's born again and carried up through the hepatic portal vein to the liver on the right. And the liver is a good name. It is the liver. It delivers. It is, and then it does something special to all the substances, which then can pass new compositions of substance throughout the body. It is where what is outer nature, outer natural, is first of all broken down and destroyed in what we eat, is then recomposed into divine human substance. The unique thing happens through the liver, and then that blood, which is not just venous blood with carbon dioxide, but it carries what the liver has done to the blood, to all parts of the body, all organs of the body. So it's very important. And what's interesting, if you look at, Steiner speaks a bit about this in terms of Beethoven. Beethoven's music was partly connected. There is this connection with Prometheus and Beethoven. Prometheus was tied to a rock, and he had his liver fed on by an eagle, which represents consciousness feeding off the life forces. And of course, because the liver is the composer, it is an image of an organic musical composer instrument, and it composes new superstances out of all the fallen substances that go into the body. So, and in what happened with Beethoven was that he transmuted these processes into actual music. And it got more and more possible for him. When he couldn't hear the outer world, he could hear the inner world more. In his greatest work, the Ninth Symphony, he was completely deaf. He got massive applause, but he couldn't hear it at all. But he heard it inwardly. He could hear it inwardly because he was listening. He was tuned in to the divine composer element of the liver, and so hence this connection with the idea. We are made in the image of God. All these processes you see it in the Kabbalistic tree as well, how light goes in one hemisphere, goes to the side, then goes down, and it zigzags down through the body. So even in the polarity of the stomach and the liver, there is this crossing over, so you've got the liver, a gallbladder, which then sends something which becomes involved in digestive juices, which come out of the stomach. So, and then this other thing goes, so it does go back down, and it's weaving across. We know that the right side of the brain has an effect on the left side of the body. So in a way, in these forms, both in Michelangelo's and in this replica, this is an image of this, an archetypal image. What Steiner is talking about is the vast beings that are involved in this process. Because in a way, it is this idea that there is things always coming in from the side to pull us off. And we're tightrope walking ourselves to our higher nature in our ego. And our astral body is always saying, go over here, do this, do that, can't go forward. There is this element. And of course, if we go consciously, and going back to the Odysseus idea, you say, I don't want to deny those forces. I want to hear them, but I'm not going to obey what they want me to do, but I'm going to listen to them. And that begins the great transformation, because in Odysseus, it isn't just that he is tied to the mast and he doesn't react. The fact that he doesn't, what happens is that in a way he's pulling the sirens out of their own entrapment, and he's lifting them up onto another level. So it's the transformation of those forces. Interesting enough, what Ari talks about. Torres.
Harry Forreston,
Yeah,
Torreston, which I have audio versions of his book on the channel by permission of himself, so you can go back and read that or listen to them as well.
Yeah.
But yes, we've just finished a conference with him at the Steiner House. But this is what he's talking about, isn't it? It's transformation.
Transformation as opposed to just translocation. Mm-hmm. But what happens with the Odysseus, in some senses, he does translocate and transform. He has to translocate them into himself to make them, to lift them onto a higher level, which is in a way also the representative of mankind by Steiner represents also the great mystery of the temptation in the wilderness. You've got these two forces vying for the power of this divine human being. They want to take it over. They want to take it in their direction. Ahriman wants to take it down and chain it to the material world, and his ultimate success would be the transhumanist agenda, to replace the organic, not with the superorganic, but with the mechanic. That's what he would try to do. The luciferic tendency was to take us away altogether, not connect us with the idea of transformation of the earth. But now the Ahrimanic luciferic can work together. So I always say this idea that the Ahrimanic creates a desert, a soul desert, which makes a massive thirst in the human being, and the luciferic makes the oases from which they can drink. He offers the solution, but the oasis is poisoned. That's the way they work together. So, and that's what that's when mass distraction becomes mass destruction. But the important thing is to understand all these different levels. In the Kabbalistic tree, you have this idea of the pillar of wisdom and the pillar of strength, which also represents the left and right, and then the central sephira, which is also connected with the chakras. And everything should be drawn up towards the crown chakra, the great Christian statement, and they should do to those that overcometh a crown of life, where the open crown chakra draws down cosmic light into the mortal human. Because in a way, we are really immortal beings trapped in a mortal body. And when we understand that, in a way, this prison, I say prisoners in cells, we're all imprisoned in our own cells, we're all in solitary confinement in a way, and we see out of our windows the other human beings, but we are also aware that we are immortal, but we're in a mortal cell. So this would also point to the idea of the redemption of aging, because as you get older, the cell's walls start to crack and light starts to come in, and you are preparing to transcend the cell, to enter into a state where it's an image of the future. It's only partial, but it's an image of the divine spirituality of the human being. It's a very difficult thing to accept initially, because we all have attachments to the physical world, to all the things we do. But if we really understood what the distant future is and our distant state, we would certainly welcome it. But if we would take our present state into the future without going through the necessary transformations, then we would be amazingly destructive.
We wouldn't be evolving ourselves and the planet.
Well, no, we would. Yeah, exactly. We'd be fish out of water. We would be actually emanating without our will very destructive forces. Whereas if you go back in time, in some situations we'd be looked upon as divine beings. We'd be like aliens coming in. So it's like but we've all been in these other states.
Well, I didn't know you used to watch over the statue in Gurtian, and that must have been such a wonderful job, fulfilling job to have to do. But when Steiner was creating it, he talks about how when he was creating the Ahriman part of it, he felt that he was in concrete and he had to be really careful what he was doing. Yeah. And then there was also that time when he nearly fell off the platform or scaffolding they had. Did you ever find anything like that yourself when you was working with it or looking after it?
Yeah, to one else I could see one or two people were quite disturbed watching it being there. It's like it has a very, very powerful effect. I mean, because the Ahrimanic world is such a different world from, even the figure underneath is quite different from the one that's coming up. Is already changed. It's a very powerful. You have to be very careful when you work consciously with those forces. You have to bring in a correspondingly higher being to work with you, because it's really a densifying state of experience. And then, of course, the Luciferic is the complete opposite. And I mean, there's another connection with electromagnetism. This rotating electromagnetic generation, induction. They are inducting this force, but then this force that goes forward, the very moving forward sets in motion these other beings. So there is even in our machines, you can see activities of that.
Maybe that's why he made it out of wood.
Yeah, of course he did, because in a way that's the next level from, Michelangelo was a great sculptor in marble, the mineral world. And the very fact that he worked in, he did something very subtle to all the marble in the world. That has a subtle effect. So working in wood would have an effect on wood and trees. And it's also because you're closer to the etheric. Michelangelo was an incredible, sculpture was really a massively new and very incarnated physicality. Whereas the representative humanity is also lifting up. It's more an etheric image. It's what you see in the astral world and feel, So it's wood is a unique substance in that way, because it.
Oh, I was going to ask you, what did you think about? Because he talks a lot about, when Steiner does, when he was making it, about how he was making the figure which is supposed to be Christ, his head and this forehead. There's something about the forehead.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that, the face.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting, because actually, in a way, the head and the face is an androgyne. It's not male or female, because in a sense, that's also true of the superphysical worlds. When we die, we enter a realm where we're neither male or female. We're both, but neither. And that's it's an image of that. And also, it's a curious thing. On the forehead, you've got this kind of lines like swirling, which is what it is really. It's a fusion of the lines that come down, which are about will, the pointing down or pointing up, and the lines that are horizontal, and they've become one. So it's a kind of it's an active swirling image of what the third eye is doing. So it's kind of really, profound. There's a reason for it. And of course, this is echoed in the whole movement of the hands. The whole thing is like an expression of the hand. Even the whole shape of the whole thing looks rather like a hand, but the hands are everywhere. You've got Ahriman's hands, Lucifer's, and you've got representative humanity. The gestures of the fingers and the hands are so much, where there aren't really any feet, which shows it is also about the etheric world. I mean, in the Last Judgment, you've got everything. You've got the whole body. It was quite a technically difficult thing for Michelangelo to achieve, because he has this figures rising up on the right side, figures that are carrying away the instruments of the crucifixion, and they have no gravity, but their bodies look as though they were. It's like because you draw and sculpt gravity in relationship to how a body is working on the earth. But that's a very curious spiritual technical thing because all the other things he sculpted were very much at weight, when dealing with weight and form. But in the Steiner's work, that's not a problem. It's not that. It's depicting this dynamic of the Ahrimanic force, and then this other pulling away thing of the Luciferic, and what the representative of humanity is doing. Like the temptation in the wilderness, he's got a hand out for Ahriman, and saying, yes, all right, come up, I'll deal with you. And he's saying to Lucifer, come down. And what it is, it's an act of love. In the temptation in the wilderness, it's not saying I reject you, I run away from you, which the Christ being criticized, the Essenes, because as Ari Torreson would say, that the Essenes were translocating Ahriman somewhere else. We don't want to deal with it. We can't deal with it. whereas the Christ being was taking them in and saying, I will transform you. Do your worst, I will still have love, and that will overcome you. And it does, and that's what it is. That's the great evolutionary deed which is constantly working in all of us.
Sorry, yes, Steiner talks about that in the fifth gospel, doesn't he? About how the Essenes felt they were all doing the right thing and had their gates and locked themselves into their compound, but all the demons and demonics weren't coming in. Instead, they were going off back and affecting everybody else.
Yeah, well, of course,
outside.
absolutely. Which, of course, that is in itself a demonic thing. When you have this purity of exclusion, even I dare say in the Anthroposophy, there's elements of that. You know, you've got to put roots into the darkness to change it, not to run away from it, but to understand it. You know, really is.
Well, I can understand how it's a challenge for people to look at the dark side, whether it's their own dark side or other dark side, you know, like reading the Steiner work of what Lucifer and Ahriman are doing. It can be quite confusing at times because, you know, at one moment he's saying they're here to help us and they help transform us, and then another, they're here to hinder us. And I think that's where people get quite confused, which is why I like this statue, because it's showing us, as you were saying, of the transformation. With the Statue of Humanity, he's got his arms one down to as if bringing Ahriman up, though some people have said to me, no, he's pushing them down. No, but I'm like, no, the way the hand is open.
That's very, to say it's pushing is very simplistic. I mean, that is, he's saying, come up, but you're going to be transformed. This is the price. If you want to evolve, you must enter under the Christ-filled human being. You know, that is what you must do. You must eventually become a servant. Ahriman, you know, he wants to enslave. He has an impulse to enslave, but his only hope is that he becomes a servant. And when he does, when he's redeemed, he'll become one of the greatest servants of the human being. You know, that's the real. It's a long time. That's different from this idea in the apocalypse, where human beings, a very, very few, serve the dark intention way beyond when it should be. That, you know, going into black magic, you know, that's where you are misusing the gifts the gods have given you and opposing their purpose, their greater purpose for your smaller purposes, you know. So,
well, these were the groups that Steiner was warning us about, weren't they? The dark brotherhoods, or the black magicians, black sorcerers, which sometimes I can't quite comprehend why they want to do this. What is it that's, well, you know, do they hate us all and the earth so much?
Well, I mean, it often comes from the original feelings, you could say, of these beings that were cast out, which some of them have actually got beyond, but they leave a residue, and that's picked up by human beings who think they're working for the dark force. You know, that they're working for this justice, but they're actually just extending their own. They're living off this capital, you know, because also one mustn't forget that those powers of darkness who enslave, they have no loyalty to their slaves. Once they've used them, they discard them.
Cut them off.
Yeah, they don't want, because they're only it's the serving of the great selfhood, you know, so it's and we all, human beings, fall for it. I mean, of course, if you make life hard, Ahriman, as I say, makes a soul desert. He makes it very, very difficult. It's very easy for other beings to come along and promise, you know, we'll give you this, make you feel good, you know. And if they work consciously together, one says, you make it hard, and then I'll bring in this. You do this. You make it dry, and I'll sell liquor. You know what I mean? It's a whole thing, you know. So that's the counter. And that, of course, now in the black magicians and the secret brotherhoods, they've taken over this primary adversarial force, and that's a lot of that is already moving on the other side. But they're lagging behind, and they're still trying to realize this, you know. So it is a very complex situation. But the thing is to be able to diagnose. I can understand that impulse, that behavior is Ahrimanic, and that's Luciferic. What does that mean? One wants to bind you, wants to prevent this freedom. One wants to take you into a false freedom. If you can see it or read it and things people write, the way they behave, you know, diagnostics of that is very, very important. You know, so, and you see it in the world. I mean, in the world of power, people who get attached too much to power, they don't want to give it up. that was quite interesting. This guy in Scotland, I mean, I don't think particularly highly of him, but I do respect the fact that he stepped down very easily. You know what I mean?
He was in the politics of the guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he just stepped and said, I'm not going to, it's quite rare for people to do that. Most of them want to cling on, endlessly.
So there must be a little bit of conscience in
him.
Yeah.
I think he's just a bit realistic, bit conscience, and that's a good thing, when people do that.
Well, I've been doing the last few years these talks on how does it go? Morality before politics, awaken to conscience.
Yeah.
Because there seems to be a lot more about just political agendas rather than what is good for the people and what's right morally and ethically.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And that's the whole great thing. And the love of power is one of the great addictions. There are many forms of addiction, but that's one of the great ones. And you taste it, you can't give it up. You need more and more of it. It's such a archetypal thing. It's in great dramas, in the Scottish play, but that play invokes forces, that in this Lady M, she actually invokes these forces to help her, to help her husband become king. It's like and of course there's a kickback. You can't invoke those forces and think there's not going to be, it's going to be all hunky-dory. It's they'll just use you and then destroy you, so.
And also they probably enjoy the dark forces that are being invoked by her, having that little bit of power for a while and using her and going, oh yeah, we've given you this, and then it's like,
and also because they lost their position, and it's their way of being somebody, being something. People commit terrible crimes because it makes them feel, I'm somebody. You know what I mean? All these terrible things like that guy killing people, with a sword or something. That's because I feel impotent. I want to feel I am somebody. It makes me authority. Most dark deeds are done because people want to feel they are alive. There's something. They've got some significance, So
you actually remind me a bit now, actually, of what you was talking earlier about the blood, and a lot of magicians like to shed blood or sacrifice something with blood. So in a way, that's them disregarding or degrading the purpose of us. I nearly said euthanizing the blood then. I mean etherizing the blood, which is what Steiner talks about, isn't it? For example, last week we had, it was a full moon, and we had horses from the cavalry bolted because of some loud noise. Now, one of them poor horses got quite badly hurt, but I found it quite interesting. There was bloodshed on a full moon on a grey horse. And in some ways, some people could use that as a kind of a ritual a thing to use for the dark forces, where of course Christ wouldn't have allowed that himself. He would have been looking after the horses and making sure that the horses didn't bolt. So I sort of went around the houses then, but I was just kind of trying to come back to, this is one of the problems with these dark brotherhoods, is that you want to invert the real use of what blood is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, in a way, you see, this is the extension of the whole idea of the blood tie. The original, that was very significant. And if you take blood out of the human being in the wrong way, not talking about blood donors, but if you take it out in the wrong way, you're trying to extend that and deny the etherization of the blood, because the etherization of the blood is to take blood even more inwardly into your soul forces, whereas when you shed blood, you're taking it out. You're actually taking it out, and you're countering. I mean, the whole blood mystery, one of the great mysteries, is from Abraham to the incarnation, the blood flowing through the generations in preparation for the incarnation. Very prime important forces were going in. At that time it was, they even had animal blood sacrifices, but human sacrifices were not allowed in the Hebrew stream. But then once it had reached that point, it became, in the Christ being, became less important, and in fact much more important is what happens with the etherization of the blood, the love of the other human being, not necessarily a blood tie relative. So, and human sacrifice was all about trying to take hold of that force on the earthly level, instead of lifting it up, transforming it, and giving it back in a new form. You take hold of it, and if you take hold of Steiner speaks about in a lot of black magical rituals. Murder gives power. It does give power. People who murder, like in crime gangs, things like that, you often see some little runt of a guy who runs the whole show. And you think, how does he do that? It's because he's created a kind of atmosphere of fear. And it's because if you murder somebody, you gain an authority. You know, it can be you can radiate some fear, and that will control people. You know, because you don't have any conscience, you're not held back by anything. So you know, these are, you know, but of course, what's happening is you yourself becoming a victim of those forces. You know, so
well, as Yoda says in Star Wars movies, fear leads to the dark side, but most people are fearful because of what they're being told to be fearful of. You know, like I know there's. For example, my own parents very fearful of being robbed because it's in the newspapers all the time. They watch far too many crime dramas, so they rarely go out in case they get shot or killed. But that's fear being put into these people rather than actually going and living a life. You know, and not being fearful. Live life and feel alive.
Yeah, well, of course, I mean, there's a lot. You know, it's a lot down to the media and what is put over all the time. You know, people are locked into another reality. And they're fed this stuff, and they're not really trying to experience nature, the beneficent forces of nature. So, yeah, it's fear is Ahriman's main emanation, whereas you could say desire, uncontrollable desire, is Lucifer's. You know, we don't understand what that means, but it's.
But that can cause fear sometimes because you fear that you're not going to get your desires.
Yeah, of course. And that causes addiction, and there's all kinds of things that lead on, and all this has its root in an overarching materialism. This is why I often come back to this thing, that the people who think they are, you know, giving us the true picture of the universe are actually responsible for shutting us off from a truer one. You know, I listened the other day to this, you know, it was very benign on one level, this woman talking about she does a book on Radio 4 now talking about the stars, but the way they talk about them, and the fact is that they do not have any understanding of any kind of spiritual conception whatsoever, and it's usually a denial of it. It makes all the stuff they talk about useless. At best useless. What does it mean? Because you're not connecting with it. You know, and you're a materialist. You're going to die. You don't believe in life after death. Your children, and they're not going to understand this. They're not going to. You know what I mean? When you analyze it, you think this is crazy. You know, we just come from nowhere. We have a life. I love my family, but then I die. You die. Go on. Forget it. All over. It's just mad. You know, they don't take it in. They don't take it in deeply into and what that really means. I have an experience in my own family. You know, that people don't think what's going to happen. When I die, am I have a family? Do I feel for anything? You know, those sort of things have really got to be taken into consideration, because what is alive, what has no barrier and has no limits, is actually love. It's, you know, not physical. It's the soul. It's everything. That lasts. That's where we're immortal. And that's the most important thing. Unless you also work with that and become conscious of it, you know, you're not going to experience it so much. You know, so.
Well, that's what this statue is all about, isn't it? The representative of humanity, like you were saying, bringing the love, giving the love to, and trying to help them redeem themselves. But for many people, I think I call them the sleepy people or the unbelievers. It's because they're not looking with spiritual eyes, as Rudolf Steiner would say. And I think they don't want to go too deeply into that kind of thinking, because then they've got to think about themselves and who they are and look at themselves. Because doing this kind of path does make you look at who you are, how you're being, or you know, how other people interact with you and things. And I think some people can't face themselves, so it's fear of looking in.
Yeah, no reason for that more and more is because there are so many situations and institutions, and you could say businesses and corporations, where that is not encouraged because it's seen to be an enemy of the profit motive. You know, this is where the Ahrimanic forces and money comes in. You know, that everything has a price, you know, and it's more important that our business makes money than we have any concern about humanity. And that also has its roots also in this materialistic picture of the world. There's no reincarnation, there's no life after death, there's no spiritual, there's no ultimate meaning, even though I go home and I love all my kids and I'm very sentimental. It doesn't, and because of that overarching thing, the business world says, yeah, well, there isn't really anything, let's just make money. That, you know what I mean? It's all consequent. And because of the materialistic world conception, the so-called elite of intelligentsia, the ones giving us the true picture, that has a powerful influence. And what's really difficult to do is to sort out what has been valid in the world of what we call science, what is, what works, and what isn't, what is an agenda which is denying and distorting our reality. I'm not against science. I studied a lot. It's amazing. But, understand it. Understand what it is, what it's limited, what it's an image of, it's an imitation of, and what is the greater purpose. It's like, so, I mean, we got these misleading things. We're going to get to Mars. We're going to get, all this stuff is, even in their own terms, is deeply misleading.
Well, I'm just going to bring it back to the statue for a moment.
Yeah.
There's a giant ear on it.
Yeah. Oh,
Can
yeah.
you discuss that?
Yeah,
a little
you
bit?
mean that whole form?
Well, I've been told that when I look at it now I've been shown that I do see that there's an ear in the whole form, but also doesn't Lucifer have a big ear?
Well, yes. I mean, that can be this kind of, it's almost like it's a womb, it's an ear, it's a sounding, resonant chamber where he's kind of listening to himself. He's got echoes of his own being. It's like a mirror, a sound mirror, which is then stripped open and pulled down to serve something else. Don't just look at your own reflection. You've got to serve humanity. You've got to be brought down. That's the great transformation. I mean, Lucifer's transformation in the statue is much more obvious than Ahriman's. Ahriman's chained down beneath and he comes up a bit. But of course, when he's coming up on the right, he's now kneeling. He's in a position which is more human. There is a greater sense of his humanity in that particular position. But yeah, I mean, the idea of a listening, and then you've got this other figure, this small, we'll call the rock spirit. They seem to be humor, said to be spirit of humor. It's above it all. But that's quite an interesting idea. The humor is a very high force. It can be, it's could be called the 13th sense because if it's done with love, it brings things into the human. It returns you to the human being. Mm-hmm. However grand you might think you are, you're also just a human being, and that just is not just. You are a human being. More than anything else, that's more important than you're a king or a manager or whatever the other things you are. And then you're part of some great project, unimaginably great.
I do find humour is very important also in this kind of path. We shouldn't take ourselves too seriously, but at the same time we need to be serious about our study.
Yeah.
But we must try to go with a kind of a light heart, which would also be humour.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember reading about how Buddha said that we should laugh at the demons.
Well, yes, you could laugh at them and then even laugh with them, and you can make them. This metamorphosis of this love thy enemies. Make your enemies laugh. Mm-hmm. If you can make your enemies laugh, you're really triumphing. Which is not easy, but that's something to do. I mean, even these stand-up comics can do that to a certain extent. They give the heckling crowd. They can win them over. So in a way, we've got to win over those forces to the light. Really, I mean. Humor is the light-hearted effect is, that's a paradox. You never take anyone seriously who hasn't got a sense of humor. You've got to really feel that links us to all other beings. It's not a denial of the seriousness of the work, but it's enhance it. It says this is like the flower on the whole trunk and leaves, it's a magical force, really. Because if it's connected with love, but of course you can laugh at things, you can mock, which is the fallen image of that.
Because that's the difference between the two. I remember now as a teenager, I used to be with a gang and we'd laugh at other people, but now I realise I shouldn't be doing that, but laughing with people is much more important.
Yeah,
We'd all laugh together, but
Yeah, I mean,
still
also,
see
yeah,
it.
absolutely. And laughing at yourself is the beginning of that. You laugh at your own weaknesses. You don't think you're perfect. Ever think you're perfect? You've got to always be aware. That you're struggling and you make mistakes and you'll go on making mistakes and for a long time. So that's part of it. And you can self-mockery is the only mockery that's really valid in a way.
Well, should we talk about the Sistine Chapel and this piece of art for the Judgement, because this is links with it? And
yeah, well, of course, we did say something earlier on about this, the whole idea that it's the symmetry of it, the clockwise motion. You've got the dead rising up on the right, going through the liver, which is the composer, the recomposing on a higher level. And you've got the coming down on the left, the decomposing into the damned. I mean, in a sense, in the Last Judgment, there is a figure, probably in some senses the most terrifying figure in the whole of art. It's a character who's sort of like this, and he's looking through his fingers with one eye, and his devils are dragging him down. And it's like all the sort of terror, existential terror of medieval conception of eternal damnation is actually in his face, in his eyes. And of course, in a way, that is a very problematic thing, because I always say that if you're damned, you're D-A-M-M-E-D. In a way, we're all damned. What that means is that we can't take our present state into the future heavenly state. We've got to go through lots of transformations to get there. That's the journey. But if we, so that's the block. But in the medieval conception, of course, there were no purgatories either. You were cast down, and that was it. And where it's terrifying and severe is the idea that for a few errors in your life, you can be judged. It's like the cartoon of that, the hideous cartoon was the Auschwitz. You go over there, you go over here. You're going to go to the gas chambers, you're going to work. You know what I mean? It's that simplistic kind of glib. I mean, the idea that you can be punished eternally for something you've only done a limited amount of time and there's no hope. It's like remember in Faustus by Marlowe, there is that scene at the end where the time has run out. The devil made this deal, now you're dead, you've got to pay. I mean, it's and also in that thing about James Joyce, The Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, he describes this idea of eternal damnation. It's not 1,000 years, it's not 1,000,000 years, it's not, you can't, you part of you'd say, hey, God, is that really just? I mean, it isn't, because in a way that was a distortion. When, for instance, reincarnation was excised, there wasn't this idea that, yes, as Daniel Andreev, the Russian writer, puts, there are purgatories, and if you do something really bad, you go into those states, and you stay there for a long time until you've worked it off, you've worked, and then you climb up, and you can climb up, and you can climb up, and get out of it. No one, should say that anyone is damned for eternity. No human being should say that to any other. You can't say that. However bad something's done, there is a possibility of putting it right, and that's the whole mystery of the Christ. It is intrinsically Christian, the idea of reincarnation. And that we go through these learning processes. We learn through all these things we do wrong. Like a small baby cries tantrums, has to learn how to become a human being in relationship to others. And that's what it's about. But that idea of eternal damnation as a living reality existed, and I felt that myself. I felt that fear, that incredible. And in a way, if it was true, it is, and it possibly has some truth only in the terms of black magician who permanently puts themselves and refuses. It is a fear which is beyond any other fear you can conceive, because you don't know. Hell has no limits. I mean, that famous line from Paradise Lost, when Satan says, myself am hell, and in the lowest deep, a lower deep opening wide, threatens to devour me, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. It's like, what? It's like, it's Michelangelesque on a massive scale in literature. But of course, that time there wasn't reincarnation idea hadn't. That's what the Christ brings in the second coming, in a way. This idea that there are purgatories, but there are no permanent hells. You know, there are ways in which we can rise out of them. But I know that feeling, that unimaginable is unimaginable. You know, eternal damnation. It can't be imagined. It's just, you know, ridiculous. Also, like saying, you know, that you can't really imagine this idea of, you know, people say, oh, I don't care about dying. It's all going to be oblivion. It's not going to be oblivion. You know, you can't really imagine that. It's like you can say, or say, how do people say, how dare you, you know, preach that there's life after death? How dare you, you know, when there's nothing? I say, well, if there's nothing, they won't even know there's nothing, will they? I mean, you know what I mean? There are ways of dealing with that, but those sort of questions really have to come, and that's through art. Those works of art have hidden in them, you know, those questions.
How do you think Michelangelo was inspired to do that painting? I'm not saying, obviously he was commissioned, but do you feel he was, like Steiner was going into the Akashic record, was Michelangelo perhaps doing that? Or do you think he was being perhaps somebody in a past life that was there at the Christ time, like they say Raphael was John the Baptist?
Well, I think it was several. I think Michelangelo, but all those three, particularly Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael, were all figures. They all had sheaths from great figures in the Bible. You know, whether it was Michelangelo, definitely had a strong Moses and Peter thing going through him. And there's obviously some kind of sheath, you know, how these sheaths are astral or etheric. And Raphael Steiner speaks about definitely the John the Baptist. And Leonardo, the Manu, Noah. You know, there's definitely an element there. But I think also, in Michelangelo's case, I think it was a very, very strong ancient Indian incarnation. Because, in a way, it is what he's talking about is the chakras, also the cosmogenesis in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, you know, the Vedas, you know, all that stuff. And in a sense, what he's going through is he's going through the after death and the Karma Loka, and first of all the review on that. That's what he's actually prematurely manifesting his own judgment after death on the last Judgment painting. And you got that image of this empty skin being held up. You know, it's like, and that is an image of he's emptied out his inner self into the entire picture. So it's a sort of, it's a premise, because he was, that was when he was in his 80s. That was his last great work. You know, it's like he was foreseeing his judgment of his higher self upon all his life. His higher self was the Jupiterian figure through which the divine cosmos was coming, and it was judging him. And that's what he was painting this. He was, you know, looking at the whole thing. So it's probably massively affecting him, you know, deeply, both the fear and the awe and the wonder. And,
Well, he would have known about the Book of Revelation, obviously. Would that have been something the Book of Apocalypse read quite a lot in those days as well?
Yeah, I'm sure he would. Having, you know, read Genesis, he would have read the Book of Revelation. I'm sure that was very powerful. I mean, it was Dürer who did stuff of that, didn't he, from the Revelation, which is more the northern mysteries to a certain extent, whereas the Genesis book, the Last Judgment, was somewhat of that, but it wasn't quite the same sequential manifestation that it was in the north. I think that's to do with climate, really, because interestingly enough, in Michelangelo, a lot of people are unclothed, you know, and that's all to do with Italy, you know, it's the heat, the whole thing, you know, whereas in northern mysteries, you're much more inwardly. So, yeah.
Just for those that live in the UK, if you can't afford to go to the Sistine Chapel, there is a replica of it in Worthing, and I've actually forgotten the name of the church now. It might even be St Michael's or something, but there is a fantastic replica there. And the man that did it, when Dulux found out he was making this replica of the Sistine Chapel, they supplied all the paint. So
how big is it? Is it the same?
It's not the size of the... I don't know if it's the size of the Sistine Chapel. Because I've never been to the Sistine Chapel, so I don't know. Because it's not a big chapel, is it? But you could get a few hundred people in, couldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is probably... It might be to size. I'm going there again in June, so I'll find out. It's just outside Worthing on the south coast of England.
Oh. So when did he finish it?
You know, it's gone from my head.
When did he start it? How?
So I think it was the 1970s.
All right. He's obviously died, has he, since then? Guy did it.
I'm not sure, but I do highly recommend it for those that can't afford to get to the Sistine Chapel in Italy. Just pop down to Worthing if you live in the UK.
yeah, that's amazing. Wow.
But also with painting, when you're doing any kind of art, Steiner talks about how different arts are influenced by different people. And I think sculpture, isn't that a luciferic way, and painting is an Ahrimanic way? Have I got that round the wrong way?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say. You could almost say the other way around. I mean, because with sculpture, you've got all-round vision. You know, what's interesting is that actually Steiner's representative humanity is more like bas relief. There's no back view. You know what I mean? You are looking at like a picture which has come out a bit into 3 dimensions, whereas in most of Michelangelo's work, you can get all the way around them. But actually, I think one of his most famous works, you don't really do that, which is the Pietà. You know, you do, but some of his works definitely all-round sculpture. And bas relief was also a lot in the Renaissance. Ghiberti, who did the baptistry doors, you know, is very much of bas relief. But they also brought 3D sculpture to an incredibly high level. Not just Michelangelo, Bernini, and also to a certain extent Cellini, Benvenuto Cellini. But yeah, it's a big question. I mean, the different arts demand different things, and they come out of different realms. I mean, the realm of color Leonardo was very much into that. He wrote a whole treatise on painting, what that does. You know, it's and he did molding and things like that, but he didn't really do ordinary sculpture.
No. Well, he was supposed to have done the horses, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was the sort of model which I think he wanted to cast. I don't know whether it was made out of some sort of clay thing, and then it was destroyed by French archers and stuff.
Was it? Because I heard the story that it did get made, but then the war came and they needed the whether it was made of bronze or iron. I can't remember to make the cannons.
Maybe that's possible. Yes,
but
I don't know.
You hear all these different stories.
It wasn't quite finished. I don't think it was. Pretty amazing, but it wasn't quite finished. Much larger than life, even than a horse, I think.
Well, one of my favourite places in the V&A is the copy of Moses with Horns. I think the original is in Italy, isn't it? So
yeah, that's in the tomb. That's in the tomb of Julius.
Maybe you could speak about that because many people get confused. Why has Moses got horns? Is it a mistranslation? Though in olden times there is the idea that if you get a certain wisdom or a divine wisdom, you do grow horns. But some people say it was just a mistranslation. What do you think? Or what do you think Michelangelo was coming from with that?
Well, that's also to do with this idea of the etheric, the idea of the horn, the 7 head, 10 horns. It's really their etheric antennae that grow out. They're sort of picking up something. Reminds me of that famous book, Voyage to Arcturus, where this incredible book written in the 1930s, a man going through this wildernesses, and he feels this strange pains in his forehead, and suddenly these things come out, and as they come out, suddenly the whole world changes. He's in a different world, and then they go back in again. He's in, then another set come out, another world comes out, and which is really what it is. It's the higher, it's the antennae, the etheric antennae that grow out of the. I mean, these are interesting things on the visage and the, of saints. You often get this idea of the eyebrows arching upwards, and this sort of, the holy, like becoming the Gothic arch, and that's where the 2 eyes meet in the 3rd. It's what is called I call the upper crossing. They go onto the cross, and outer vision is crucified, and inner vision is resurrected.
Wow.
Whereas the opposite of that is the demonic down triangle. The demonic eye, where you get dark clairvoyance. So I mean, those things are on very high level art. You do see those archetypal things manifesting.
Well, in ancient Egypt, it was when they had the not the Ouroboros, the snake coming through the third eye, was because it was linking the this is from the esoteric Egyptian, from the Kundalini coming up and rising and coming out through the third eye. So they'd have the Urias, that's it, the snake, and sometimes it's the eagle, isn't it? Because the eagle is the more etheric, and the snake would be the more, I think, astral.
Yeah, I mean, all those things are metamorphoses of, the fall of the animals, the sacrifice of the animals, are then drawn back into the human and lifted up onto a level. So if you gain those powers to manifest that, you will have power over that world, the beast master. That's really what it is. That you overcome the beast in yourself. You have no fear of any outer animal at all. You radiate authority and love, to all creatures. So
do you think, because I often look at I've got pictures of a representative of humanity. Is it a good thing to look upon and perhaps meditate upon? Obviously we don't have the statue here in England to go and look at, but just having the picture. Sometimes it's quite difficult on the postcard ones to see everything, but if you could get an enlarged one, it's going to help one with their spiritual path, hopefully.
Oh yeah. I mean, of course, if you have quite a large version of it, you can. The thing is to look at it, and then go away, and every time you go away, try and recollect as much of it as you can. I mean, I've done that a bit with the Sistine Chapel. I try to recollect parts of it, and that is really powerful. You're not just, click out the camera, I mean, it's a real, that's what, you should do with art, almost observations,
Well, I think I was thinking of that because of, I notice if I take a picture of something, but don't look at it properly, I don't remember it properly. But if I look at it properly with my own eyes first, then take the picture, I remember it much better. And that's why I was thinking, obviously we haven't got one to look at here. Can't go and visit, well, we could go and visit it if you've got the money to the Goetheanum. But it'd still be okay to look at it as a picture to work upon. Obviously you're not looking at it then through a digital camera. I think it's quite different looking at pictures on computers and laptops as well as to actually looking at a print version of something.
I mean, the thing is, because also, as I said before, it's more like a bas relief. It's more like a picture. It's not like a sculpture. You have to walk around it. It is actually really something that's coming out of two dimensions. It's going in and out between 2 and 3 dimensions. So it's much more possible. But anything you can do to recollect. I mean, I think this is about all manifestations in animals and plants, to not only observe them beautifully, but also to be able to recollect as much of it as you can. Then you get somewhat of what Ari is talking about, which is you're fading into it and you're drawing it out, and you become one with it because you've recollected it. You reconnect it and recollect it into the living wholeness of the world, So that's the real, and that's counter to that is the once you have everything come in from the outside and not developing any inner picturing.
Well, I think that's been a fantastic talk on the statue. Is there anything else you want to say about the statue that I might have forgotten to ask you?
Well,
there's so much to it, I know. But
no. I mean, I think it is this sort of the androgyne, this figure that is, and the whole, you don't see much of the body. You're just seeing the gestures of the arms, the hands and the fingers and all that stuff, and that's countering the hands and of the other forces, really. So it's the more you think about it, and you see the shapes in Ahriman, these hard angularity. This is another thing. It's the solid crystalline forces, which are normally associated with the masculine. The masculine body is more crystalline, more hard-edged, generally speaking. The muscles external muscles are more developed. Feminine body is more curvilinear, more cosmic, which is also more luciferic in a sense. So you can see these polarities, which we have all of us have within our being. So that is, the Ahriman is the bone principle, sort of.
Well, funny you should say that, because now you've reminded me of what someone asked me to ask you about this. Because Ahriman's got quite a strange face.
Mm.
And I often used to think he seemed like, you know, there was no flesh to it. Maybe it is all just bone. And I haven't really been able to figure out what is he meant to be made of. Because he is Lucifer is a fallen angel or archangel, but I still don't quite understand what Ahriman is.
Well, he's a fallen, in a way, he's a fallen archive. I mean, he made up, and Daniel Andreev has good things to say about it. He says there is a kind of fallen etheric. It's like an armor. It's it's encased in this armor for which Ahriman peeps. And one of the signatures, when you look at human beings, when people look really
slanty-eyed,
you can see that very, eyes are sort of like this, they're kind of, that's Ahrimanic. It's coming from an Ahrimanic state, it's kind of, it's pinched.
So just to describe it, because obviously going to hear this in audio, kind of when you're looking through your peepers, but you've not got your eyes quite open, but you're still trying to see what's going on.
So is that, yes, it's that very kind of, looking out, and there's a form of deep suspicion about everything around you. It's kind of built-in paranoia. And the opposite of that is the kind of wide-eyed, open, sort of manga thing, kind of. Kids are always cartoon with big, wide, open eyes, Because Ahriman doesn't want to give away his light. He wants to see, but he's not going to give away. He's not going to share it, really. He's just watching and see what you're doing, And the very pointed sort of face is his focus, but it's an exclusivity. That's what it's about.
And you once described him, I can't remember if we've done this in a show before, but I really like this analogy of he's like a drunk who wants to, an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give that analogy.
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing about, an alcoholic is you're living with one. You have a great relationship with them, but you'd want to save them from their alcohol. They don't want you to do that. And you keep hiding the bottles, they keep finding them. They don't thank you. They fight you all the way. But eventually you succeed, and they will thank you. And this is the same with Ahriman. He's fighting us all the way. But if we succeed, if we win, which we will, he will then thank us and become the most grateful servant of the human being the universe has ever known. But that's way ahead of us.
Yeah. But that I think that's a great way to end this show, actually. But would you perhaps mention about you're doing at Steiner House, and they have to find them on the website, or perhaps you've got the event book, what the dates are, but you're doing conversations with people. Maybe you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, well, Cafe Conversations, it's a semi-formal thing. We do it on Saturday morning, starts at 10:30. You can go on as long as you want, really. I mean, the deal is that you pay £10 to get free coffee, tea or cake, maybe as many teas as whatever you want. And we talk about many things. I mean, it's very much a matter of what I've suggested themes in the program, but we're open to what people, really important issues they want to talk about, thoughts, ideas. So it's not like a study group in a formal sense, but you can open up a lot, and it's a good social exercise as well, and also how to have a good conversation, and that's normally it's every other Saturday. We've got the next one on the 11th. We've got a 3-week break, but it's on the 11th, then there's the 25th, then there are 2 in June, I think, and that's
so it's
it.
the 11th and 25th of May.
Yeah.
And there are some in June, but I do recommend people just check on the website first.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Patrick. It's been a very enlightening talk.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully Ahriman and Lucifer are inspired by it.
Or annoyed. Annoyed first, inspired later, hopefully. Yeah, great.
So thank you everyone for listening, and until next time, peace.